Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and I would say in Shadowlands right now, rogues are in a really good spot. In terms of performance, in raids, we're really not that bad. In terms of Mythic Pluses, we are pretty much wanted. In PvP, I mean, rogues have been dominating no matter the expansion, and I would say right now in PvP, all three specs are really good. Playing a rogue in the current expansion of WoW is pretty fun. But the question that I get a lot, actually, is if for some reason Blizzard were to remove rogues, or for whatever reason, I just couldn't have the ability to log on my rogue anymore, which character would I main? So I wanted to put this video together to talk about some of the different classes that I would consider as my mains for different reasons in Shadowlands if for some reason the curtains were to close on my rogue and it was nowhere to be seen again, and I had to start over. Where would I begin? My first class on this list is going to be a Death Knight. I've always enjoyed since the days of Oblivion, like Elder Scrolls Oblivion, the idea of a Spellblade archetype character. And this was before I really got into RPGs, kind of very shortly after moving to the States, from Russia, which would probably explain why I have so many Russian speakers in the chat all the time whenever we do duels, especially on EU, which happens Fridays from 5 till 7 p.m. East Coast, starting around 11 CEST, and Saturday for the NA servers, if you guys want to join for the duels, which happen regularly. But my first Oblivion character was an Aragonian, and I played that guy through every single DLC, every single quest that I could find, through all the different guilds that were available. I had lightning in one hand, wielding destruction magic in my left, and a trusty sword in my right, speccing into one-handed weapons, so I could do a little bit of physical and a little bit of magic damage. And I've always enjoyed that archetype whenever it comes to like RPG style characters, but somehow, some way, I landed on a rogue in World of Warcraft. I think it started off with my love for druids and wanted to get good at feral, and then figuring out that rogue is just a better feral at the time, and I enjoyed that tremendously. But if my rogue were to vanish permanently from my character selection screen, a Death Knight would be the closest thing to a Spellblade archetype. Whether it is Frost or Unholy, it is a caster plus melee mixed together with a little bit of physical damage, but also a little bit of magical that got some range to it like a caster would. I also like the Death Knight's toolkit. Currently in Shadowlands, they are a little bit of a slower spec in terms of mobility, but outside of that, they have a ranged interrupt, they have a grip, which is super cool, anti-magic zone, even though that got nerfed, it's still really good. They have an anti-stun mechanic, they have AMS, which kind of acts like a cloak, so it has just everything that I would want in terms of like the utility that you bring in a variety of different content, and the playstyle between the Frost and Unholy and even Blood Death Knight, which I think would be more of a challenge to me since I'm not a tank natively. And also Blood DKs are sometimes considered one of the squishier tanks, so for me, a challenge on a new class would be something that would drive me to want to get better at it and probably would engage with me more long term, which is a really good thing and definitely worth considering. Death Knights also are pretty good in just about any content. I mentioned earlier they're okay in dungeons, they're pretty good in raids, they're also pretty good in PvP, so there's a lot of experimentation for me in terms of the variety of different things that I can play in. Because I'm a rogue, I play in dungeons, I do keys all the time, and I like pushing keys. I also like mythic progression, getting the bosses down on mythic and cutting edge, and of course PvP. I stuck together with that out rogue no matter how much of a meme it is, but I continue playing it, and recently we've even hit 2200 this season, which was pretty cool. But also, Death Knights are really unique because of the Covenant system. While their Covenant abilities are not the most varied, they are still pretty good. The difference you get in gameplay for Death Knights, whether you're Venthyr, whether you're Night Fae, Necrolord, and Kyrian, are there. And the different legendaries you can run, which are the systems of Shadowlands, I think I would have plenty of time to experiment and play with. So Death Knight would be definitely one of the first few classes that I can think of that I could potentially main if I abandoned my rogue. The class that follows it easily is a Paladin, because it's a very similar thing to a Death Knight. It's kind of like a Spellblade, except with a Paladin, you are a little bit different. Instead of being like aggressive gameplay of your spells, you're more of a supportive gameplay. I think the damage dealer archetype of like an old school cleric, I played a little bit of Baldur's Gate 3 when that was out in the early access, and I definitely still want to play it once it comes out, but that idea of a cleric who's just this battle-hardened warrior with some support spells on the sides. I mean, that's what a Paladin right now currently is, and it just sounds really, really cool. You have Retribution Paladin, who could dish out some damage, judging foes with a little bit of range on some abilities. Lots of burst as well, but also a utilitarian toolkit. You have Holy Paladins, which are more healing focused, but are a melee DPS, which to me is super fun and an awesome idea for a healer. A healer that's up there next to the tanks, in the thick of it, doing damage, but also off-healing their allies. Or a Protection Paladin, who apparently do a lot of damage right now. A lot of them were brought in for the World First competition in order to dish out as much damage as they could to the boss, so I think that'll be pretty fun to play with. But also the utilitarian off-healing playstyle that they get, that they can use inside of their teams, I mean, that plays into the whole cleric mentality. But also the toolkit that they bring between blessings of protection, blessings of sacrifice, ranged interrupt, if you let's say protection for example, bubble, spell warding. You just come with a toolkit that I think would be pretty fun to play with, as well as all these auras that can be played in different situations, whether it's PvE or PvP. And in Shadowlands, it's also worth considering the covenants we get to play with. And in fact, I'm actually a huge fan of all 4 covenants that are presented to Paladin. Right now, I'm exploring Night Fate, which isn't a popular covenant, but I'm enjoying it. I think there's some hidden potential to it in maybe very specific situations. Same thing goes for the Necrolord Paladin. That was a really big meme at first and had some potential going into patch 9.1. While it's not a popular covenant, I do see Retribution Paladins with the Necrolord combo, and the wombo combo damage they can do is actually kind of out of this world. Of course, Venthyr is really strong, so is Kyrian, and the different legendaries that Paladins can play with gives you a lot of opportunity to play different builds, which I think would kind of play into the longevity of exploring a class that I would potentially main. Monk would be on the list, but mostly because it is the closest thing that you can get to an outlaw rogue, particularly Windwalker. Well, maybe a Fury Warrior, because some people describe outlaw rogue as like a Fury Warrior with leather armor and a grapple hook and a pistol shot, but Windwalker and outlaw rogue are so close. I guess a monk and a rogue are pretty close in the energy regeneration, the common points versus the chi, but the differences are also pretty exciting as well. So for monks, what I really enjoy is the Windwalker Mastery playstyle. I mentioned it before on this channel, but I love the idea of how you try not to repeat your abilities. Whereas a rogue, you would spam Sinister Strike a couple times into a dispatch. As a monk, you would go for a jab, into a Rising Sun kick, maybe jab, blackout kick, jab, and I have enough chi for a Fist of Fury, so you channel it. And it's always just been an enjoyable gameplay. That's like, it's a really simple mini game, but just remembering which ability that you just pressed is fun to me. But also Mistweaver is another fist weaving playstyle, another melee healer, and I just talked about the Holy Paladin melee playstyle. You're up there with the tank in the fray while healing your allies, so of course that applies for Mistweaver as well. Brewmaster as a playstyle isn't a bad tank either. I think it would be pretty fun to explore, but it hasn't really been a spec that I've been super interested from a tank perspective as someone who's a non-tank. And I mean that I really am interested in Blood DK, really interested in protection. Brewmaster I think would still be pretty fun to play with. But also the covenants for monks I think have different playstyles. Some are more interesting than others, some are a little bit more passive, but I think it still would be pretty fun to explore. As we're getting into patch 9.1 and hopefully in future patches, the gap between them is going to get even closer and closer. Even on guides, it's recommended to start playing Necrolord and even Night Fae, because Kyrian, while does net out pretty decent damage, the damage is so close that it might not even worth for like some Windwalker monks to play Kyrian and the extra step that you have to play into that playstyle, but who knows really. But it's really cool because I think it would be pretty fun to explore the different legendaries and playstyles that the spec would offer for the long-term longevity, at least within Shadowlands. Now, this would be a first class. It's kind of like a little bit off the, away from everything else that we talked about. It doesn't really relate towards any play style that I've enjoyed from other RPG games or with World of Warcraft, but Mage would be another one on this list. First thing that I like about Mage compared to some of the other casters is I just love how mobile they are. With rogues, you have pretty intense mobility, not the craziest mobility of a demon hunter or a monk, but like really solid mobility that some of the other melee classes just don't come with naturally. And mages are just naturally mobile. With blinks or even with shimmer, you're just moving around the battlefield quite a bit. There's quite a few instant cast abilities that will let you move while casting at enemies, so that's also what makes them really mobile. And it's also a triple DPS spec with 3 distinct playstyles, very similar to a rogue, and all these playstyles I find pretty fun. Arcane has been the playstyle that I've been my favorite so far. Just something about it. I love the unique mana interaction that it has, some of the legendaries, and just you could either go from like a very box standard arcane blasting until you have all your charges into a barrage, rinse and repeat, or go for like the missile build, and I wonder what other builds you could even have with it. Also, like the other classes within Legion, I like the different Covenant options that mages get to play with. Whether it is potentially Necrolord with the Deathborn Metamorphosis style ability, the Kyrian Wombo combo setup, the buff play with the mirrors on the Venthyr side, or the cooldown reduction with Night Fae, I think it would be really cool to explore all these playstyles. And I'm just talking about from an arcane perspective. Imagine just doing that for Frost as well as for Fire. I always enjoyed DPS, but playing a ranged DPS hasn't been something that I've wanted to main, but if the rogue was off the table completely, I think a mage would definitely be one of my first ranged DPS that I would seriously consider, just because they are pretty fun. Again, not a melee main myself, and there's other ranged options too, but the mage I think would be the first one that I would seriously consider. Finally on this list, the last class on this list would be the Hunter, primarily because survival exists. Survival Hunter, while not a popular spec, while not a well-represented spec, while not really a meta spec in any bit of content, is still a ton of fun. If you really get to explore the spec, if you actually get to try it, if you try playing around with different legendaries and talents, and even try different covenants, if you really gave it a solid shot, you would know that it's actually pretty fun. And I don't really know if there's any spec like survival. It's very unique, and I think that uniqueness is something that draws me to it. Of course, if I were to main a hunter, I would play MM and BM. They're great DPS specs and they offer a lot to the table. Sometimes some of them are better than others depending on the content, like Beast Mastery right now shreds in PvP, while Marksman is kind of like the go-to PvE hunter. So whether you play one or the other, it would be still pretty strong, but I've never really been a huge fan of that Legolas gameplay, right? I've never really been a huge Legolas type of fan of like a range hunter build, but a hunter is kind of like a ranged rogue. It always felt to me that way, so it'll be still kind of sort of close. I am a huge fan of the melee survival hunter mobility, the unique parts of it. There's a lot of things that are unique about survival hunter, but the harpoon and disengage, the amount of mobility you can have with just that alone, combined with cheetah, it could just be a lot of fun just by itself, compared to Outrogue, who has a grapple hook, which I always enjoyed that unique type of movement, like a kind of heroic leap light version. So I think it'd be really cool. But also the unique mechanics of range abilities and melee abilities Survival Hunter brings, grenades that have this cleave conal mechanic to it. It's just a very unique playstyle that might not fit the meta, but is definitely a lot of fun, and I feel like just by itself would be quite a lot of variety no matter what you do. Hunters also have, I think, pretty cool covenants to play with, whether it is the Kyrian that's looking like the current meta, the Necrolord that I'm checking out right now, the Venthyr that was super fun to play with early on in the Shadowlands, as well as the Night Fae, which is kind of like a tried and true Hunter covenant. If all else fails, Night Fae has got your back because it's just been super solid. I think it'd be pretty fun if that was maybe potentially my main. But Hunters have always been an alt that I've brought up in every expansions that I've played so far. It's always just been fun to mess around a Hunter on the side, never really taken it too seriously, but it is another class that I've played quite a bit compared to Rogue. Never seriously, just always, just messing around, doing some dungeons, maybe some PvP, but it's always been there, so it'll be, I think, a decent fallback class just because I've had like the minimal experience, but at least the longest experience out of my other alts compared to my main spec. But that's going to be my video of if Rogue for some reason vanished tomorrow, these are the classes that I would play. It was super fun putting it together and just kind of thinking about the reasons as to why I would play X or Y class. And I'm pretty sure if I were to explore a lot more classes, because not my all alts are fully geared and not all the different specs I've really truly explored, so maybe that could change by the time Shadowlands is almost over, because we'll probably get other changes for these classes as well. Maybe some major ones, maybe some minor like new conduits, covenant changes, legendary changes, or just fundamental class changes that could swing this video in a different direction. But if you ask me right now, what class would I play instead of Rogue? These are the classes that come to mind first. But anyway, thank you guys so much for checking out this video. I really do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know thoughts or what you think about this video. What class would you play if your main for some reason just disappeared, or for some reason you couldn't play it? And what would be your go-to class? Let me know in the comments. I would like to read some of you guys' responses. But thank you all so much for watching. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.